Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Well, hello, and welcome to Garden Success. Now, we are normally a call-in show, but today we're coming to you by tape with a very special guest. And so don't try to call in. I'll try to remind people that join late listening about that same thing. But our special guest today is Paul Winski. Paul Winski is Program Specialist for the green industry with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Horticulture Department. And Paul and I go way back. I don't know, Paul, was it 10 years maybe? Something like that?
Well, yeah, I've been with Extension. This is getting closer to year 11. So
year 11, okay.
Yes.
I was a horticulturist in Harris County, and he came on as well as a horticulturist in the commercial area for Harris County. And we've kind of had a long history of all kinds of things horticulture. I guess I should start off by saying welcome.
Well, it is good to be here and good to be back. And,
Yep.
You know, we're in this new studio and pretty nice digs.
I know. I'm looking around feeling like I must have gone to the wrong place because I'm used to the same old place every time. But that's great. Well, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. Actually, I'm going to back up a little bit more. I'd like to hear how you got into horticulture. You know, what's the path there, and then kind of professionally some of the things that have brought you to your current role.
All right. Well, that's a great question. So I am not a native Texan. I grew up in Philadelphia, so go Birds, go Eagles, for all you Dallas fans. I was I guess I was in Scouts. So in the city, I grew up in a row home, small lawn, small garden, not a sprawling area. Mm-hmm. And I was in Scouts, and I really enjoyed being outdoors. Mm-hmm. And initially, I was thinking forestry. And then within the school district of Philadelphia, there is a high school called W.B. Saul High School. It is an agricultural high school. And you have to apply, you have to interview, and they only take, at the time, I think they only took like 250 students. Mm. And so students from all over the city were trying to get in here. And this school was, from where I lived, about an hour, a little over an hour, between an hour and a half. And it was public transportation, so I had to take 3 buses to get there. So if
you're one of those guys that had to walk uphill through the snow both there and back, right?
And my mom, I'd get up in the mornings, and there was a local high school not far away, 25 minutes. That's where my brothers went. And she's like, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" And I said, absolutely. So anyway, I was getting up early to go get to class, and I ended up with a great teacher, Dr. Ronitarian, and he had the greenhouse management classes.
Okay.
And so I had that freshman year. I did really well. He offered me a job to take care of the greenhouses there. And I guess that really started my whole progression into horticulture. So I changed from forestry, like the greenhouse management side, the growing side of things. Went to Delaware Valley College at the time. Now it's Delaware Valley University, which is just outside of Philadelphia. Focus there was ornamental horticulture, floriculture. And again, greenhouse management classes, plant ID, all that stuff. And decided I wanted to go on for my master's. So I went to University of Connecticut, got a master's in plant science. So I was working full-time running the tissue culture lab and doing breeding work in Alstroemeria. And then since I was an employee, I applied to the graduate school. So I was working on my graduate degree part-time while I was getting funded through this program.
Okay.
And then from there, then it just really took off.
I think you had to jump on a plane after that, right?
Exactly. So my wife and I, we got married in May. Funding was running out for that program the end of the year. And we decided to move to California. And so I was working for a cut flower grower with Alstroemeria, and I was doing breeding work and running tissue culture lab there. was there for about 4 years. He went in a beautiful part of North County, San Diego. Ocean views, can't beat it. 13 acres in production. And like everything else there, he decided to sell the land to a developer. So I was out of a job then. Honestly, my wife and I, we wanted to probably get back a little bit closer to the Northeast. So we ended up moving to Charleston, South Carolina. I actually worked for the cancer center there at the Medical University of South Carolina through a mutual friend, doing tissue culture work, molecular biology work. Was a great job, but I missed being outdoors. And so I ended up with a position with, at the time, Union Camp, which is a paper company. And I was doing pine and hardwood propagation research, which was a lot of fun because it was a completely different area, working with foresters and things like that. And then after, we were bought by a larger company. And I had a position, but I could see things were changing. And then that's when we moved out here to Texas. So it was kind of funny because my family thought we were sort of in witness protection program because we were moving like every 3 years.
Yeah,
but in 99, we moved out to Texas. I was working for Heinz Nurseries as a new product development coordinator. I was with them for 8 years. They had some issues. They are no longer in business. They had some bankruptcies and things like that. Then from there, I was working for Syngenta, doing technical resources, both on the flower side and then on the BioLine side, which was there at the time their beneficial insects, working with growers, setting up IPM programs and things like that. There was a downsizing there. I was on the wrong side, and it happens. And so ended up in academia now. There was an opening for that position in Harris County for a commercial horticulture agent. Applied for it, got it, and it's haven't been looking back since.
Yeah.
We've I've learned a lot, especially just overall. A lot more horticulture. The commercial side of things I knew, but we were getting questions on all things. I know, when you and I were there, it was easy. Then you moved to Brazos County, so then I was the only agent. So then I was even...
You're welcome.
Yes, no problem. Then I was really on I was not heavy into vegetables or fruit trees and things like that. But the resources were there, finding the answers.
Yeah.
All of that, and finally, AgriLife figured that there's a gap. We're missing something for the industry. And they
You're talking about the
my
green
current for the green industry, and so that's where they decided they wanted a program specialist to work with the green industry and commercial horticulture. I applied for that, and January of this year is when I started, and it's been a great ride. It's been a really nice change.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. I'm happy for you.
Yes, yeah. Working with the industry, getting applied research projects going, writing fact sheets that I know the green industry needs for growers and things like that.
Yeah, you put out, you guys, you and an entomologist, I believe, put out a really good one on aphids, I remember.
Yes.
And you've done some since then.
Yes, so we have aphids, we have two-spotted spider mites, and thrips will be coming out shortly. So we've got a third one coming out. Okay. And so we've probably got about another 3 or 4 more that we want to do. But overall, just being able to work with the specialists, getting out, I'm working more with TNLA, which is the Texas Nursery Landscape Association, teaching a course for their certification for the Texas Certified Landscape Associate. So it's I'm not, even though Harris County is a large county with 4.7 million people, working now across the state and meeting more people, producers within the industry, and trying to figure out how I can help them and get them the information that they need and the help that they want is, from my perspective, a welcome change.
One thing I like about AgriLife Extension is there, the horizon, the possibilities are endless. you,
Yes.
you could work yourself and 4 more people to death just trying to accomplish all the things that are potentially opportunities out there. And so that's always a challenge, to narrow things down and look at what do we need to be doing. And in your case, the industry really helps provide input for that.
Yeah, and that's really how I see this position is having the industry tell me what it is that they need and they want. Ultimately, what I'm hoping we get to is maybe a growers council or a landscapers council, and they're saying, groups of them are saying, here's the issues, and with the input from them, us ranking them out. If we've got 10 potential projects, what are the top 3 that we can handle first? We'll go after that, and then this way, it's not something that I think they need, but it's something that they're telling me they want, and I can help them find the answers to it.
So it's not we're from the government and we're here to help you.
Exactly. Exactly. It's more this is what we need help with, and how can you help us get?
That's the beauty.
To the answer.
That's the beauty of Extension in 254 counties in Texas, and it's locally driven. That's our goal, is to get input, so every community has their needs being addressed. And so that was a little Extension commercial right there. That
I'm getting there over. Texas is big, and I know the growers, most of the growers and things, in my area. I'm located in the Houston area, but I've been over to San Antonio. I've been up to Lubbock. I've, been to Austin. So just getting out more and more. And I know if I wanted to, I could probably be traveling every week, but I've got to take those baby steps. I don't want to burn out too quickly, but making sure they know who I am and what it is that I can do for them.
There you go. Well, if you're listening to the show today, you're thinking, what's going on? Well, what's going on is Garden Success Today is not a call-in day. We're coming to you by tape. Our special guest is Paul Winski, a program specialist for the green industry with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Horticulture Department. And we've been talking a little bit about Paul's history, where he's been, and as you heard all that, you probably think, "Oh my gosh, that makes my head spin." All those different kinds of roles and jobs, and some of it pretty darn high tech. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and go more to what's going on in people's yards. The people listen to the show; they're interested in their lawn, their garden, their trees and shrubs and whatnot. And the elephant in the room this summer was drought and heat. And boy, did it take a toll.
Absolutely. I've received several calls, several emails, and you know what? Just driving up here, so coming up from Houston, tree stress. We're seeing early signs of it.
Yes.
But I think next season we're going to see it.
Yes.
Probably over the next 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
And people, so we need to let folks know that it's not. Symptoms may not always occur overnight, especially with trees. It's going to happen over time. And if for some reason we get another extreme cold spell, or we're in another drought, next year, these trees are going to, really feel it and show it. And a couple examples. Some of the things I'm seeing, at least down in the Houston area, is Magnolia grandiflora. Southern magnolia. There are some commercial plantings that every one of them is dead.
Yeah.
So it's, for the producers, for the growers that are growing these trees, they're going to have to be replaced. And if they want those, there's going to be demand for them.
Well, and this happened back in the record freeze we had, but when there's so much need, it's hard for the suppliers to keep up, because you don't just plant a magnolia seed one day and sell an 8-foot tree the next.
Exactly.
And so that takes, especially with something slow growing like
exactly. It's a multi-year process. I guess one of the good things is a lot of the issues with supply chain that were problems from COVID are finally working their way out. Soils available, pots available, starting product is available, things like that. But when you have a higher demand than what these growers are growing, and way back when I started, growers would grow, basically what we would call on speculation. They would grow more than what was already sold. That's not the name of the game anymore. People are only growing what it is that they know is either already sold or, based on their data or information from the previous year.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of extra product out there because they don't want to get stuck with it and have to scrap it, because then that costs them money. So
Understandable.
it's going to be interesting. Demand will be high, especially for larger trees and things like that. So.
Yeah.
And some of the things other things we're seeing, I guess, physiologically in the plants. Bradford pears.
Yeah.
If you're driving around the neighborhoods or looking as you're going about, you may see some that are blooming. I've received an email of pictures of a redbud that was completely leafed out, but it's putting out flowers again. And so that's a stress response. These trees have been stressed, and it's almost like, hey, we've got to set seed because we're not sure if we're going to make it, through the next season.
That's true.
And so that's how that tree is responding.
Yeah, the ornamental pears seem to be the worst. Well, actually, all pears seem to be the worst about that thing. But a lot of other, I think you were mentioning redbud is one that you've had some, or you've driven by and seen them. I've had calls at the extension office on apple trees that are blooming. And,
really?
Normally a tree sets its buds in late summer and fall for the spring bloom, and then it goes through this dormancy, and then when it comes out, it blooms. Well, we kind of had a summer dormancy almost. Not almost, we did.
Yeah.
And trees coming out of that just bloom. It's a shame because, someone said, do I cut them off? And I said, well, no, enjoy them now because that's next spring's blooms and they're not coming
Yeah,
coming
and
back.
that's it. So it's going to be interesting because we'll probably be getting calls next spring saying, how come my tree isn't blooming?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, did it bloom last fall for you? And they'll say, yeah, it normally doesn't. Well, that's what happened.
Well, I think we take for granted the fact that trees are out there in nature. They've lived there for a long, long time, many old trees even. And you just assume, well, why would they just die all of a sudden? And then I was thinking back on it, and if you go back to February of 21, here in College Station, it got to about 7 degrees, which is too cold for our landscapes and landscape plants in general. And a lot of trees, severe damage. Chinese elm, major splits we lost a lot of Chinese elm, some dieback on a number of different species. Then we go into a summer that was pretty rough, and in fact, let's see, last summer, 22, I think we went 45 days over 100 degrees without rain here in Bryan College Station.
Okay.
And, trees have extensive root systems, but when that soil gets pumped dry, they've got to cool themselves. They've got to continue metabolic processes like photosynthesis. And when you shut all that down, it's big time trouble. And people call and say, well, my tree died overnight. Well, close to it, but actually it's been dying a long time.
Yeah.
So then we get into, let's see, what are we, 33? Okay, December of 22, and here, that cold down in the mid-teens, crepe myrtles weren't ready for it, and several other things. But crepe myrtles are hardy enough for this area, but not when it hadn't had a chance to harden off. And then we go into this summer. Is this making everybody sad? Or any gardeners trying to jump and land on their gardening forks or something? Hang on, don't impale yourself on your soil gardening knife. But this summer, same kind of thing. And so we talk about the effect of this summer and what it's going to have on our trees, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. But it's just like one thing after another.
Yeah.
And these trees are stressed, and they're resilient, but resilient to a point.
Yeah. Everything has its breaking point. I remember that first freeze back in, as you mentioned, in 2022, and it was just telling people, just be patient. These plants are really resilient, whether it was shrubs or trees or perennials. And for the most part, certain ones came through no problem. A lot of the citrus, took a hit, didn't come back, and things like that. But it's just when it's that cumulative effect, it just really does a number. And people forget about how that, or they don't know how that can build up and affect a tree or shrubs in their landscape. And so it's it is a challenge, but as I say, when I talk to my family and they're shoveling snow, I don't have to shovel humidity down here. And, I just, one of the great things down here is you have such a long season for growing, for enjoying plants, for getting out in the garden.
Yeah.
And so, you've got to take the good with the bad.
That's true. Well, I know our trees with their stress, oaks especially, but elms and several other species can get hypoxylin canker, and that's a stress response. It's a weak pathogen, I guess, in a sense, but it's already out there. Dr. Apple, plant pathologist, was telling me that it's actually in the trees, the oak trees around, but it's present. But when the tree gets weak, it comes in, and I mean, it barks flying off, and it's dying fast. But it really is dying because of the stress of the tree. It's like the resistance in the tree is weakened, the immune system is weakened, and here it goes. And we have the same thing in our lawns with take-all root rot.
Exactly.
Normally, take-all isn't just jumps on a perfectly healthy lawn, but boy, you stress it, and there's a lot of ways we can stress it.
Yeah, and it goes back to that, plant pathology 101. You've got to have a susceptible host, you've got to have the pathogen, and the ideal conditions. Mm-hmm. And so when these all align, that's where the problem comes in. And whether it's drought stress or when we have very wet seasons, or you name it. And a lot of times, though, those pathogens are probably the secondary cause. Mm-hmm. People see that result and they're thinking that's what killed it, but really it's probably that the stress of the drought or the freeze or whatever that made that plant susceptible to the pathogen that they're visibly seeing, which is causing the problem.
And we're going to see a lot, I'm sure. Visiting with some foresters and just kind of talking through the how trees live and grow and that whole process. The storage of carbohydrates is really important. And when you're getting defoliation late in the season, a little too early or whatever, or the lack of water causing the physiological processes not to run, like photosynthesis, that helps make the carbohydrates. And that is a tree that's already weak, and now it's going into winter without an adequate store of the things it most needs.
Exactly. And there I would see questions or hear questions of, are trees dropping leaves? It's the end of July and August, and that's a defense mechanism that the plant's trying to shed some of that so it could help conserve whatever it has. And if you think about some of these larger trees, we're here on campus, and the amount of pressure it takes for them to move that water from that root system up through that trunk out to through those leaves. It's pretty amazing that they survive it all the way they do.
Yeah, it is. It really is. We shouldn't be surprised they're dying. We should be surprised they're alive.
Yeah, those that are making it really is pretty impressive. And then you turn on on a campus here, if you've got a lot of foot traffic and soil compression and all that other stuff, there's other things that occur, and all of that can build up if that tree is just a bit vulnerable or susceptible, and it's you're going to have problems.
Yeah, there are many kinds of stresses. There's drought stress. There are certain kinds of herbicides that will really weaken and damage a tree and a lawn. There's soil trenching, cutting roots, and of course the lack of water. And that was really driven home to me back when I was horticulturist in Travis County in Austin. There was this pasture where there were several post oaks, and around one they put a pen for goats.
Okay.
And these goats, it would rain, it'd be wet, and the goats are just trampling their little hooves, just pounding that soil, making it denser and harder and less well aerated. And that tree, hypoxylin, just wiped it out the next spring, and none of the others. And the only difference was the soil compaction of those hooves, from those too darn many goats, right under the canopy spread of the tree. And, there's a lot of ways plants get stressed. Well, so here we are on doom and gloom. It's gonna get better, folks. So I guess it can partly it can advise us on some of the plant choices that we make, looking for things that might be a little more resilient. It sure can advise us on how to take care of things.
Absolutely. Well, you and I both know when we talk to master gardeners or do any of their classes, I think one of the things we always stress is the right plant in the right spot. And being able to find those resources. Texas Superstar plants. If you go through that booklet, I'm sure you're going to be able to find plenty of plants that have been tested,
Mm-hmm.
through the university, and they're going to perform well for you.
Yeah.
And I guess the other caveat is, we'll have those descriptions where it says drought tolerant. Well, that means, for an established plant.
Right.
So
Right.
if you plant it in the spring and we have the summer that we have now, you're still going to have to give it water, and it's not drought tolerant right out of the box,
Right.
right out of the pot.
The analogy I like to use, we get a plant like Texas mountain laurel. It grows out of a limestone rock in central Texas, and you can't even figure out where it's getting water.
Right.
There's no soil, much less, and it does fine, but it's established.
Right.
But you take one out of a container and put it in the ground, and the whole root system is in less than a foot wide chunk of growing mix. And my analogy for that is John Wayne. John Wayne was a mean old hombre in the movies, right? But when he was a baby, his mama fed him every day, changed his diaper. I mean, he couldn't have survived in the desert.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think that works for me.
Yeah. And so that's that to me, that's one of the key things is when people see that, they think right away, well, it says here it's drought tolerant. Yes, but that's for an established plant.
Yeah.
But the plants in that list, you're going to be successful with them. You'll be able to. They'll hold up well. Extreme cases, Mother Nature can always throw you a curveball.
Yeah.
But
true.
making sure, trying to, I guess, load the deck in your favor by choosing the right plants. When I first started out in extension here, you get transplants that people that had moved from the Northeast of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Can I grow lilacs here?
Yeah.
Nope.
We need a society for the prevention of cruelty to plants to be on the Texas border with right beside customs.
Showing that if this is what you grew here, you can't grow it here, but this is what we recommend.
I know you enjoyed your Colorado vacation, but we're going to take that blue spruce and take it right back.
Exactly. And so just understanding, the palette of plants that are here,
that's important.
that you've got, that you can work with.
Mm-hmm. Well, native plants continue to expand in the palette of availability.
Right.
That was always a challenge, is can you buy a bunch of them? And I see some nurseries more and more carrying a wider and wider variety. And it doesn't mean natives are just, the be-all, end-all. We have some well-adapted non-natives, of course, but that certainly is a great place to start if aesthetically you like the looks of the plant.
Yeah, and I think just understanding that when you purchase it, it may not look pretty.
Mm-hmm. Oh man!
And that's the biggest challenge. When I was on the nursery side, we would always get that question of why aren't you growing more natives? Why aren't you? And the problem is, in a 5-gallon pot or a 1-gallon pot, it doesn't look good. No. And the gardening public. Now this was early 2000s, but I think they're getting better. They're starting to understand it more, but they want instant gratification.
Right.
It's got to be B&B, bud and blooms. There's got to be flowers on it. It's got to look good.
We need a 4-inch pot that's got a dinner plate size red hibiscus bloom on top of that poor little plant.
And the interesting thing is if you go to Europe, whether it's the UK or Holland or any of them, they will sell and purchase plants like that are dormant still, but they've got a nice big label on it. But the public understands it and they know it, and so there's no issue purchasing. Where here they want it look good. They want to drop it either in a big planter or in the landscape and be done with it.
And you see that when shoppers are at a garden center, they're going through a tray of marigolds trying to find the ones with the most blooms on them or whatever the plant is. And really, we should be buying a plant that is not having to take care of all those current blooms. Let's get the plant growing and healthy, and then it'll put a lot more blooms on.
Yeah, buy it with more buds than with more open blooms. But that color attracts you. You've only got, it's a very short period of time that as they're coming into the garden center that catches their attention. Yeah. Color sells, and so that's that's the way they're programmed. Yeah. And so the growers have to have the product looking like that in order for it to go off the shelf.
Well, you mentioned Texas Superstars, and those of you listening, if you go to the Aggie Horticulture website, it's aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. There's a link there to the Texas Superstar plants, as well as Earthkind roses and other kinds of plants that just have a way of surviving here without us.
Absolutely. And the good thing is they've been tested. They've been trialed throughout the state. If you think about it, north to south, we're zone 6, zone 5, down to probably zone 10 now, down in the valley. And so climatically, that's diverse. And if you go west to east, the amount of rainfall is from just about 10 inches to over 40, maybe close to 50 inches.
Over 50 as you get all the way to Orange.
In East Texas. So, finding plants that perform under those growing conditions is a challenge. So that's one of the things that AgriLife does is we've got these folks, these committees, these groups that are evaluating these plants across the state to see how they will perform, so that when they make that list, you can feel pretty confident that, all right, if I start with a good plant and I've got this plant, I should be able to get it into my landscape and enjoy it for more than one season.
Right.
If it's a shrub or a perennial, there are some annuals in there, and your annuals are going to last for one season, but you know that you're going to be successful with it. Yeah,
that is true. You mentioned beneficial insects a little bit earlier, and when you were working with Syngenta. Talk a little bit about how the world of beneficials, how in your time of watching it, has changed. And I think people probably aren't aware of what some of the technologies are for getting beneficials into like a greenhouse. So maybe you're buying, poinsettias or something for the holidays, and that plant, beneficials may have been in a very unique way involved in the growing of that plant.
Yeah, more and more growers are starting to, we talk about IPM, integrated pest management, and more growers are starting to look at and use and incorporate into their programs, whether it's releasing beneficial insects. There are what we call biostimulants, biopesticides, things like that. So growers in general are becoming much more sustainable. They're not quote unquote organic, but they're growing, they're using less of the conventional chemistries.
Right.
Now, does that mean that they've stopped using them? No, but they can use them a lot less, which is a good thing.
Well, and part of it is knowing how to use them, and it's not like you just turn a bunch of ladybugs loose and go on spraying 7 dust on everything,
right?
Because you don't have many ladybugs,
right?
So they have softer technologies in terms of sprays that don't kill beneficials as bad.
Exactly.
They have timing and days to wait before you release a beneficial. There's a whole scheme of how to do that.
Right. Understanding one of the terms we use in the greenhouse or at the nursery is looking at the thresholds. What is the population, the pest population in your crop? And so, like in the greenhouse, growers will have sticky cards out there, these yellow cards that have a sticky type glue, and over the period of time, some of the pests will be drawn to them. And so if you go out, whether you monitor it once a week or after a 24-hour period, it gives you a good idea of what the pest population is. And from that, you can then make a decision. Do I need to do a release of beneficials? Am I seeing spider mites or aphids or thrips? And depending on what that threshold is, whether it's 5 within a 24-hour period, or if it's weekly, the number is going to be a little bit higher. Then they can make that decision and release these beneficials into the crop.
That's just fascinating. I really, if you were to ask the average gardener, name some beneficial insects, I think ladybug would be at the top of the list.
Right.
Maybe lacewings, maybe dragonflies. But the ones that are really doing the work right now are probably not going to be on anybody's list. Like you were talking about spider mites. Tell us a little bit about there's several types of beneficial mites that eat spider mites.
Right, and so that's the key. So there's, for a lot of growers, when you first go to talk to them about this, there is not one beneficial insect. There's no silver bullet that will feed on everything. A lot of these guys are what we call specialists. They will feed on just aphids, or they will feed on just two-spotted spider mites. But a lot of them are there's a lot of predatory mites that are beneficial, and they have a voracious appetite, and if the prey is there, they go after it, they feed on them, and they do an excellent job. But you have to be proactive. You can't really be reactive when you're releasing beneficial insects, because if the pest population gets too high, they'll never catch up. But with that being said, you can then, a lot of these companies that produce these beneficials, they have what they call compatibility charts with regard to the active ingredients, the pesticides that are out there, and they're basically in a 1 through 4 scale. 1 meaning that they are probably the softest. Will they knock out a few beneficials? Yes, but they're not going to wipe out the whole population. And so knowing what was sprayed or what you have in order to knock it down. And then the other thing is, are any of those active ingredients, are there any residuals effects to them? Because if you get something and you spray, say, like orthene, its residual in certain cases is up to 4 weeks. So if you sprayed orthene and then you come out a week later and you want to release beneficials, you're wasting your time and money, because they're not going to establish that the residual from that orthene is going to knock them out. And so you've got to, the growers that understand it and do it and know it, they have gotten really good at it. And it's like anything else. There's always that learning curve. And so you start to see, the price per square foot with these inputs starts to go down with the beneficials, because they understand how they work, how they release them. There's different ways you can sprinkle them out. They have what they call these sachets. So think of a tea bag type product with a hole in the back of it, and inside of it is the beneficial. There's a little prey mite that they can eat on.
Inside the tea bag.
Inside the tea bag, and it's usually like...
so they pack their lunch when they
You
left
got
the
it.
factory.
It's got like buckwheat or something else inside there. Could be vermiculite, depending on the beneficial. And then as they mature, they just crawl out and crawl into the crop. And so it may be loaded with, say, 500 of these beneficials, but over the course of time, the beneficials that are in there are still, they're also breeding. And so it's almost like a time release thing. So for maybe a 4 to 6 week period, you can have anywhere from, say, 2,000 to 2,500 predatory mites released
Coming out of
that one sachet.
Pretty cool.
And so as those plants are touching each other, we talk about the bridges. The bridges are in place, so these beneficials can then walk across and find a prey.
Spider mite can't jump a foot over to the next plant.
Exactly.
Even though it does have 8 legs.
It's right. So it's interesting how they can do. And as you talk to growers, it's like, well, if you do a release early on, maybe while you still have them in propagation, because you've got a lot of plants in a tray. And you have them, and you get them on there earlier, then when you go to transplant, you've got some of that population on them already, and then it just makes things a lot easier.
And there's also systems where, like, they have banker plants inside a greenhouse.
Correct.
And it's like you're raising beneficial food over there, but it's not something that's going to get on your crop, but it is something that feeds the beneficial. Right.
So it's more of, it's feeding, and it's giving a place for that beneficial to go through its life cycle. So a lot of times banker plants a lot of them are used for aphid control. And the predatory parasitic wasp is growing and developing in these banker plants. And then as it hatches out and matures, it then is flying around the greenhouse. And when we say parasitic wasp, these things are very tiny. It's not like the wasp that you would think in the landscape.
When they're fully adult size, they fit inside the body of an aphid. So
That's right. That's right.
That's small.
And so growers will have these banker plants throughout the crop, and then these parasitic wasps are releasing them. and then parasitizing any of the aphids that are there. So it's the systems, the growers that have it figured out, they're really dialed in and tuned in, and they're doing an excellent job with it.
That is neat. And they've experimented with a lot of other ways of releasing. I was looking at an article, I can't remember which of the industry journals it was, but using, the little aircraft,
the drones. Yes.
To fly through and dusting beneficials through a greenhouse.
So they're doing that a lot in orchards, in vineyards. And so the one company is called Parabug. And so if you ever look it up, it's Parabug. You can see their videos on YouTube. Okay. And it's really interesting because they control it, and there's a cylinder that has the beneficial insects in it with a carrier, usually vermiculite in this case, and they are flying over top of the canopies, and the predatory mites are being dropped down over top of it. So again, it's always that, how do we get them there most efficiently, and getting them there when they're alive and they're ready to feed and do what they need to do.
What a World War II battle scene, right? All these just flocks of planes going over and paratroopers coming out of the planes, and that's exactly what
exactly. And now we got spider mites, not spider mites, but the predatory mites dropping out and establishing on the trees and in the vineyard. So it's interesting how the technology goes from greenhouse to outdoor to nursery to orchards and things like that.
Yeah, it is. Well, I know we spent a little time on beneficials, but I knew listeners would be interested in the fascinating world of where all this is going.
Right.
That's just really cool.
Right.
Well, I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of the trials you've been doing. Now, you can go on all the way back to down at P2 down in South Harris County and some things, but currently what your trials are now.
So one of the things I did this year was in the past, now I'm part of the team, the committee for the Texas Superstars. We used to have, when Dr. Pemberton was up in Overton, he would always do an outdoor trial, bedding plants, replicated. It was great to see how they performed in the beds, in ground, and things like that. Well, Dr. Pemberton has retired. We did not have that trial this past year. So what I did was, where I'm located, I did a containerized trial. So I had 14-inch pots, soil, and I had 50 entries, 50 different types of plants. Some were combinations, some were single species, and had 3 replicants of each one. So it was set up on drip irrigation. It was on a concrete slab, and it was hot as Hades out there for those plants.
And roughly when did you plant all these flowers?
So this was planted, I would say, the end of April.
So they didn't exactly have a head start when
Nope.
times were good.
They did not, and it went up until Labor Day.
Labor Day? Wow.
Labor Day.
I remember the field day you had out there. I can't remember when that was, but we had been through. We just got through talking about how bad this summer was, and stuff looked great.
Yeah,
there's some exciting new things.
That was the field day was end of July, and so it was it was interesting to see. When you're there seeing it day in and day out, it's like you know what's going on. But when you have people come out that haven't seen it, and that's the first time they're seeing it, and they're getting excited, it's like, okay, we're hitting the mark here. And so there were some of the things that I thought were interesting. Was there's a series from Syngenta of petunias, a small flowering one called Itsy. That thing bloomed all summer, and most petunias.
A petunia blooming
in
the summer.
Usually by the Mother's Day, definitely by Memorial Day, your petunias are probably done blooming in the landscape.
Wow.
And this thing just did not stop.
That's amazing.
And it was profuse bloomer. And so, if I was the breeder, I'd be working with that to get more heat tolerance into some of the other lines of petunia because of that. Whatever that gene is, or whatever it is, a combination, that for this area, for a petunia to bloom all summer was really pretty impressive.
Does it have a growth habit kind of like a wave petunia or something where it's coming over the sides?
Yeah, it has that mounding habit,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a smaller flower. Not as large as what a wave would be.
Okay.
Much smaller, but very compact, and it would be ideal in the landscape. It would probably do well as a ground cover.
That's cool.
In the container, it had that spilling effect, so it was coming over. But there were, we had some lantanas that it did extremely well. Coleus, I think some of the Coleus, the series that we had was called Talavera. That's Talavera. So if you see that next year, there was, I believe, 5 different colors. Those plants did not miss a beat throughout the entire summer. Now, I would say some of them, the foliage would fade a little bit. But considering the conditions, if they had received, say, some afternoon shade, they probably would have been fine.
Well, I remember when Coleus was just for shade.
Right.
And that trial, and folks, what he said about just imagine a giant concrete slab, the big as what your house would sit on almost, and they're just pots sitting in there in the blazing heat. And that's amazing that anything was alive. But yes, I remember the field day. They looked awesome.
Yeah, they were really impressive. Some of the colors did throw some flower spikes. So from my perspective, for a landscaper, you want those ones that don't bloom because you don't want to have your crew out there having to deadhead.
Yeah.
But in general, just the color contrast on these and the overall growth and for a full sun plant, they were really pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is cool stuff. What were some other favorites of yours from the trial?
The Coleus, the lantana, that Itsy, Vincas always do well, and there were some combinations out there that had Angelonia and Vinca in it, and you can't go wrong for the heat of the summer. When we talk about plants, the right plant, things like that. For summer, Angelonia and Vinca, they do extremely well together.
They are. That Angelonias and the color range now is pretty good.
Yeah.
And those you see a lot up here in the Bryan College Station area, where there's an entrance to a subdivision or some other like business park or something. They'll use Angelonias a lot going into that because they're just bulletproof.
Yeah. In the heat of the summer, those plants are going to be in bloom, and the breeding companies, they continue to evolve. They get some taller ones, so further back in the bed, not just up front, but then majority, I would say, are in that 10 to 12 inch range. But there are some other ones that have a little bit taller, and the flowers are a little bit bigger. Common name on that is a lot of times people refer to it as summer snapdragon. But Angelonia and Vinca do extremely well, work well together, whether in combinations or in the landscape.
That's great. That's great. Well, we finally are entering cooler weather.
About time.
This is nice. This is nice. And so it's time to be looking at our cool season flower beds and things. What are some of your favorite things to plant for maybe fall, maybe even into winter color?
Yeah, so it interesting you said that because I was just out this morning. I stopped by Spring Creek Growers in Waller, and I could see they've got their pansies that are ready. They are coming along. So pansies are great, and they will tolerate freezing temperatures depending on how long that frost is going to last. But they are very cold tolerant, so they are great. Violas. So from a gardening standpoint, you've got to make the decision. What I tell people are pansies are going to have larger flowers, but not as many. If violas, smaller flower, but it's very profuse blooming.
And in that debate or whatever choice, I'm way over on Viola's side.
Right.
For several reasons. Number one, if you're going to view it up close and you have a mix of colors like a pansy face,
Right.
that's interesting.
Right.
But when you get back and you want a swath of color you can actually see, you can get the solid color violas and
Right.
and it's easier. And then I think after a rainstorm they hold up better than
Right.
the pansies do.
Right. And it's really interesting. The color combinations that are available in either one, whether it's violas or pansies, I mean, you can have it match the colors of your favorite college team, the colors of your favorite pro team.
Yeah.
You can have it match the pot or contrast the pot. So the breeding companies have done excellent jobs in developing the colors. You can have blotched face, you can have clean, clear colors.
Mm-hmm.
You can have ones that have what we call cat whiskers on them.
Mm-hmm.
So it just really depends.
Those little marks in the petals you're
yes.
talking about.
And then there's even cascading forms now coming out. So if you want them as hanging baskets. There's a lot out there with regard to viola and pansies. Right now you probably could, I'm trying to think, petunias.
Mm-hmm.
Early on now, cool season, they're doing well. Dianthus is what you're definitely going to see.
Yeah. And then
coming out.
We have the little compact types, bedding plant types like the Telstar series was, and there's some new ones now.
Yep.
But I like the tall, the neon colors like the Amazon series.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think of the other
There's
ones.
the neons, there's the jolts.
Jolt, yeah.
There's several other ones, and those are really interesting because they're interspecific hybrids. So it's Caryophylla by Sweet William, Barbados. So you even get some fragrance.
Wow.
The other thing that's cool about those is those stems are tall that you can either enjoy them outdoors or use them as a cut flower and bring them inside.
Yeah, we're talking something that's knee high or more.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. They planted a bunch of those just next to the KAMU station over in the parking lot of the football field. They planted some just next to it in the next building over. I think the Hagler building, I believe is what it's called. And you just from the road, it's like, I'm surprised there weren't traffic wrecks because they were maroon, first of all.
Right.
So everybody was jumping out of their cars with tears rolling out of their eyes, singing the Aggie War Hymn, running across it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that flower power when you're driving down the road and something catches your eye, then you know you've got a good plant and you've got a good design because people are noticing it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep picking at your brain here. We got, you mentioned the pansies and violas, the petunias going up until a freeze. We talked about dianthus. Any other things that could be annual plants or shrubs or any version of a flower that...
Well, one of the things I really like this time of year is some of those ornamental kales and cabbages because you're growing them. It's there's always plenty of flowers, but how do you bring some other textures and colors in?
Right.
And so those ornamental kales and cabbages just really set things off differently.
They do.
And so you can have purples, you can have different textures in there. So always think about sometimes it's not always about the flower.
Right.
It's about some of these, foliage plants that could add some unique interest, depth and texture into the landscape.
And kind of mixing back in some of the things you were saying about colors. I think one of the prettiest beds I ever saw was they had Dusty Miller with a white and a very light blue and a darker blue viola all around it, and that silver mixed in. It was it was stunning. But that's bringing the foliage like you're talking about.
Exactly. And I bet you if you went out there like at dawn or dusk, that would pop even more because that white, that whitish, that silver is going to pop then. So you mentioned that Dusty Miller. That's another good cool season crop for us here. Oh, and alyssum. I really like alyssum.
Yes.
Low growing, lots of flower power, great fragrance to it. It does bring in, if there's beneficial insects in the area, it brings them in. So
the little parasitoid wasps you were talking about and hoverflies, I've noticed a lot on alyssum.
Yes, and so it's a really good plant for the cool season. Performs extremely well.
If you get enough of it, it's kind of a honey fragrance in the air. It's a real nice light fragrance.
It's a nice.
It spills over a container well.
Yeah. Sometimes majority of the color is going to be in that purplish blue, but there is like a wine color or mauve maroon, and then there's white and an off-white and things like that. So there's a pretty broad color range with it.
Since we're talking about alyssum, I want to shift out of the winter season just for real quick. We'll come back. Lobularia, which is also the genus of alyssum. So
Yes.
it's so confusing as to what to call the summer alyssums.
Yes.
So you want to talk about that a little bit?
So this, and I'll never forget when I first started with Extension.
At a Bear Creek.
Out of Bear Creek, I was like, we've got to get this lobularia in because coming through new products, the what they were talking about this plant was an alyssum for the heat of the summer.
Yeah.
So if you like alyssum in the during the winter, early spring, this is what you're going to need for the winter.
Yeah.
And or I'm sorry, for the summer. And we planted it out there, and this thing
planted it in May.
Yeah.
I mean, it was blazing hot.
And this thing thrived, and it bloomed, and it bloomed, and it bloomed. Awesome. And so it did what it did. So now it's, I always have it in my slide deck, and I always say, if you like alyssum for the cool season, plant this lobularia for the summer, and it's going to do the same thing.
And was that White Stream, or do you remember?
Yes, I believe it was. But the Stream series is what they called it.
The whole Stream series.
But since then other seed companies have come out with some other varieties
that are heat tolerant.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a great 1-2 punch if you like that look in your landscape.
Well, we need a name for the new one, the summer one, because alyssum is lobularia, but I always call the summer one lobularia, and it sounds like I'm talking about a different plant.
Yes, they look. Yeah, if you had them side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Yeah,
that is neat. Well, going back to cooler season, we're in the big middle right now of the fall blooming season. In fact, not big middle, we're toward the end of it, but starting in late summer and going into fall, we have a lot of good plants. And in spring, anything. I mean, you can buy a fuchsia hanging basket and it'll live up to 15, 20 minutes here in Texas. In the spring. It would die in the summer in 5. But, no, seriously. But we have a lot of options for color. And then summer, we have a few, and we depend on foliage a lot more in the summer for color. And then we get to fall, and people forget about fall.
Right.
But we have things like the Salvia leucantha, the Mexican bush sage with the purple spikes, or purple and white. The Mexican marigold, which is a type of marigold that has a licorice smell.
Right.
And you know what? I'm sitting here talking about plants, and we're having so much fun. We're almost out of time.
Where does the time go, right?
Copper Canyon daisies, another good one.
Yeah.
The fall aster. Oh my gosh, that's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse for not having color year round.
No, it's whether it's flowers or foliage. There's plenty of options out there.
Yeah, that is good. Well, Paul, it's been great having you again. For those who may have joined late, we're talking to Paul Winski, our program specialist for the green industry with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Horticulture Department. So thank you so much for being part of our show.
It was my pleasure. Anytime I can talk plants, it's always a good day.
I know. It's always good to see you, my friend. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here for today. Just want to remind you, Garden Success is on every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. You can listen live on KAMU-FM or on your computer, and you can also listen to podcasts. Just go to your podcast supplier and look for Garden Success.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.